It's my real great pleasure to introduce Monsieur Gilles Maindrault, and he's going to talk to us today on the eve of France's 14th of July celebrations, which for those of you who know is a big deal in France, the 14 juillet. However, before I do, I'd like to take this opportunity, as I mentioned to Marilyn, especially to officially greet our fellow Rotarians from our Twin City Club, Paris Académies. Nous souhaitons la bienvenue à nos amis rotariens du Club Paris Académies qui sont bien représentés sur Zoom aujourd'hui. Permettez-moi de remercier tout particulièrement le président actuel, Philippe Caille, la présidente sortante, Joyce Pelham, et le coordinateur de Zoom et un autre ex-président, Jean-Charles Bossard. Bienvenue tout le monde. Now back to our speaker, Gilles Maindrault, who is another ex-president of the Paris Club, as you will have seen from his resume. Gilles had a long and illustrious career in the French Postal Service, rising to very senior positions. I'd like to add on a very personal note that Gilles and his wife Nicole have remained good friends with Nancy and me since our initial Capital Cities Club exchange back in 2007, the third point on the four-way test, of which you will all hear his presentation in a moment, which is many parts, some Rotary and some relationships between our two great countries. Gilles, mon ami, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President Marilyn, for your kind invitation, and also to past President Bill Dent. Thank you also to Salvador for his technical support. A special hello to past President Nancy, my fellow president in the COVID promotion. I would like first to apologize for two things. The first one is my English, my typical French accent, but I have a solid team of 3 translators behind me, Mark, Mimi, and my wife, Nicole, who is hiding somewhere here. The second one is for reminding to you in this presentation historical events that you probably know better than I do, but they are key to understand the present relationship between our two countries and indirectly between our two clubs. By the way, our own club, Paris Academy, is 65 years old this year. This is the story of an exception in history. We have two nations that have never been at war against each other. Of course, there are some other exceptions like that, but between two major countries with global intervention during the history is quite rare. And the first part of this story begins in the 18th century, as you know, how France helped the 13 colonies to become 13 states and one independent sovereign federal republic. At the beginning, there were 13 colonies, as you know better than I do, including 9 crown colonies with a relative autonomy, especially for local taxes. This was not really dictatorship. And then England had to finance the 7 years war it had waged on the continent. I would say business as usual. How? Partly by creating new taxes, as always, on foreign products coming to the colonies, among which the tax on the tea was only the cherry on the cake. It was the most famous, of course, Boston Tea Party, but it was not the only one. Unfortunately for the English administration and the Crown, Virginia and some others deemed that this was not about commerce regulation, thus being a matter for England, but about disguised new taxes, usually a matter for the local assemblies. And an 8 years war began with about 1/3 insurgents, 1/3 legalists, 1/3 neutral, which is not an unusual proportion in such circumstances. That's when Louis XVI sent, before being beheaded, arms and ammunition, leading to the Saratoga insurgents victory first in 78, the ground troops with Commander-in-Chief Rochambeau, who together with Washington, George Washington defeated Cornwallis in Yorktown with the participation as a guest star of Lafayette and his volunteers. And the fleet with 4 admirals, La Motte Piquet, De Grasse, d'Estaing, and Suffren, Brittany, repeatedly defeated the Royal Navy. While a coalition, well, it's a modern word, it was not really a coalition, but you can understand it now, including the Province Unie, that is to say the Netherlands, Spain, and Russia, helped to arm the insurgents or blockade the English commerce. Any similarity with current situation somewhere in Eastern Europe would be fortress. You can see here a picture you have in your capital, a very large picture of Cornwallis surrounded to Washington after Yorktown. So to summarize this first part, in 76, we have the Declaration of Independence by 13 colonies. 11 years later, in 1787, we have the Constitution written and adopted for a new federal republic, with a little help from its friends, as would say the Beatles. Another painting in your capital is the first Congress. This picture is more recent. You recognize the Mount Vernon Washington House, but maybe you do not recognize the small characters, the small person before him. These are members of our club, Paris Academy, and members of your club, Washington, D.C. It was in April 2007, with a chilly wind coming from the river. Photography of the key given by Lafayette, key of Bastille Fortress given by Lafayette to Washington, George Washington. Thank you, Mark, for providing me this photo. And then we come to the second part of this history. How the USA and Great Britain and some others, of course, helped France to be again an independent and sovereign republic. This started on September 3rd, 1939, with a declaration of war by Great Britain and France. During several months, we have the drôle de guerre in French, approximately translating by the odd war. It was more observation than a real war. And then during the campaign of France, the high intensity war, the real war, began on May the 10th for a few weeks only, and ended with the defeat of the French army and also with a British corps that was fighting with the French army on the French ground. One day later, the armistice was signed by the government of Pétain, Marshal Pétain, an old man, nominated president of the council, and with an occupied zone and so-called free zone. The republic is abolished and replaced by the État français. De Gaulle, who didn't accept this view, launched his appeal from London on the BBC 24 hours later. And then the USA stopped to be neutral on September 2nd, 1940. They passed the leaseback law on March 11th, 1941, thus providing huge quantities of weapons to the Allies and especially to Great Britain. It was quite decisive. Pearl Harbor, 7th of December. And during those long 4 years, De Gaulle, alone for beginning, unified and organized the resistance from London with two forces. Outside France, the Force Française Libre, Free French Forces. It's more or less the regular army in Great Britain and North Africa. And inside France, the resistance with the Force Française de l'Intérieur. Three geographical zones have played a major role as springboards in the counter-attack, with a massive and decisive help of the USA. Great Britain, North Africa, and Rotary, leading to the landing in Italy on September 1943, the D-Day, 6th of June 1944, of course, the landing in Provence on August 44, and the Soviet attack in Central Europe in August 44. Paris was liberated on August the 25th, 1944, by the combined forces of Leclerc, General Leclerc, and his Second Armored Division, and the FFI in English, the resistance in Paris. In Strasbourg, it was quite a symbol, on November the 23rd, 1944, by the First Army of General and then Marshal de Lattre. A strong and permanent coordination between the Allied armies from outside and the resistance inside, about 400,000 active fighters, or more or less 1% of the population, was a key condition of the success. Here you have symbol of the sacrifice of American soldiers, with this picture of cemetery, military cemetery in Normandy. And here a view of Utah or Omaha Beach, one of the two American beaches on the D-Day. So to summarize this second part, nothing would have been possible without the combination of the fighting spirit of millions of people, soldiers, and resistance within and outside Europe, with a huge industrial capacity of the USA. What de Gaulle and Churchill had foreseen as soon as June 1940. If you hear back the speech by de Gaulle on the 18th of June 1940, you hear perfectly the announcement of these islands and of the success of the industrial capacity of the USA over the industrial capacity of Germany. So within a distance of about 170 years, we have two similar processes, but with respective and quite different technical means and geopolitical situations of each period, of course. The 20th century was not at all the same as the 18th century. Here you have a picture of the military parade on the Champs-Élysées with the two flags on the 14th of July parade. By the way, I'm sorry to say that the Bastille Day is not really the Bastille Day, like the common belief in France and abroad. So officially and legally, it's not the right name. But the date of July the 14th, as the National Day of France, was defined in 1880 under the Young Third Republic in commemoration of the Fête de la Fédération, Federation Day, that was celebrated on July the 14th, 1790, and not July 14th, 1789, as we often believe. This is a commemoration of the national unity and not of the attack of nearly empty and disused old prison by a few dozen rioters. Of course, indirectly, this is the attack of the Bastille, which is celebrated, but through the Fête de la Fédération 1 year later. And now, for the history of a relationship between our two clubs, some pictures. This one in 2007, in the Judge Margolis, one of you remember, in this port. And this is an apprentice, dead now, but it was one of our dear members. And now another intern, the Judge Margolis court. Maybe you recognize him. Maybe you recognize also those two people, so two kind and smart people, somewhere in Washington in 2007. especially my favorite English teacher. This picture was taken 4 years later. Our tree planted in 2007 grown up. This is in 2011. I don't know if he's still here because I think you need a lot of place for so many trees on the Capitol Hill. The exchange of banners between two presidents of our respective club, Don Marks and André Gouzu, also in 2011, I think. And this is a place very important, both for our club, because we have met during several years for lunch on Monday in this place, restaurant La Coupole, and important also for the French-American history, because many Americans, especially writers, artists, used during the 1920s and 30s to have a drink or dinner until midnight or late in the night in this place, La Coupole. It's called officially an American bar. Maybe anyway, somewhere here on the terrace. And this is our double cake, birthday cake. We have eaten together with our American friends and also Italian veteran on a boat on the River Seine in 2007. And this picture has been taken the day after for breakfast at La Coupole. And some of you recognize Paula Dello. She was also a dear friend. Here you have the dream team of Washington, D.C. club at La Coupole with Mark and Nancy, Jay and Sharon, Don, David, May, Clara, Paula Dello, and also your colonel of the Marine Corps somewhere, and some others. This is a picture of the Water Summit sponsored by our two clubs in 2011, and with a master choral of New York City during the dinner of Gala. Thank you for your help 78 years ago, and for your attention today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, and Salvador will be leading us through our questions and answers.
Je voudrais aussi accueillir nos invités français à notre club. I would like also to welcome our French guests. My question is, the Second World War marked the rise of the United States as a superpower and the decline of France as the world's second largest empire. And my question is, how is France today dealing with its imperial decline, and more particularly with its relationship to its former French colonies, where in many cases there's tension with immigrants from the former colonies?
It's a difficult question. I try to answer in English, but maybe I will need some help from my translators. I would say that France is used now not to be any longer an empire. And it has completely cut with the idea of empire. But there are still remaining of the history of imperial France with some overseas territories, but now they are completely part of our national territory, especially with 11 million square kilometers of economic zone in the Pacific zone. And we have also strong and narrow relationships with many countries in Africa. Some of them say they are suffering of colonization, but maybe they are also suffering of their own governance. and maybe colonization is which is very, very far away now in our past, is an excuse also for many things, which are not all due to all imperial powers like France or Great Britain, and to somehow not imperial, but overwhelming, dominating USA. Many of those countries forget that they have also had in the past some colonial attitudes on their continents, and that some of them have still colonial attitudes now again. So it's a very ambiguous situation, very complex, very difficult to summarize in a few sentences. History is not always simple, and we have to make with this.
Good to see you. It's always wonderful to have the contacts with the Academy. My question was the following. In your presentation, you didn't touch on World War I. And my grandfather went to France and fought in France along with your countrymen. So what, in your interpretation, was the significance of the American participation in World War I?
Well, the mere reason is that I had only 20 minutes.
That's correct.
My two grandfathers were spent also 4 years in the trenches of the First World War. So it's quite important for me also, and for my family. So maybe they were together with your grandfather in the same trenches in the northeast part of France. Of course, it was important too, but it was difficult to mention everything during the last 2 centuries. But we do not forget that about 700,000 soldiers, American soldiers, came to France in 1917 and to fight, especially on the Somme River, during very heavy fightings. And what role they played at the end of the war. So, well, it was only a practical reason, not.
With the UK pulling out Brexit from the EU, the relationship between the UK and France, how do you see it in future? Because there were a lot of French young professionals who commuted regularly between London and Paris. And I'm thinking forward to the future. As you can tell, I was not for Brexit, so I need to make that very clear from the beginning. How do you see the relationship between the UK and the rest of the European Union, but particularly France, developing in the future for young people?
Again, a simple question. Well, I have a mixed feeling about Brexit. On one hand, I regret the Brexit because I think it's a deadlock for UK, which is an important country in Europe. And it cost to the European Union 67 million inhabitants, a great GDP, and it's not a good sign against Mr. Putin, Mr. Xi Jinping, and others. On the other hand, maybe it's a clarification, and it's now easier for European Union to go on its own way. So history alone will tell us if it was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. For your specific question about the relationships between France and the UK, I think that anyway, we are condemned to work together, especially in military field, geopolitical field, but also in the economic field. And I'm not sure it will change many things between France and the UK, because one way or another, the UK will go on following the same laws are following in the EU. And I don't know, I think it will be more negative for them than for the EU.
So on behalf of the Rotary Club of Washington, D.C., I am very pleased and proud to present you with the certificate signifying our commitment to plant a tree in honor of the Paris Académies Rotary Club and continue our lovely twin relationship for many years to come.